It's episode 104 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. You can find all the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. And while you're there, click on the links, subscribe in iTunes, and please leave a review. It helps other people find the show. Before we get into our great interview this week, I'd like to tell you about one of our sponsors, and that's the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals. The AIPP is an organization that helps band together freelancers and people that help support the indie author community. And by that I mean people that do cover design or layout, any of the things that authors need to do what they do. If you are one of the people that provides those services, the AIPP is the place for you. Come join them, get connected. You can network with other people. You can find authors that need your help. And if you're an author like me, you will find someone that has a service that you need. This is a great idea. This is a great place for people to band together and to get their services out there to people who can actually use them. So go to AIPPonline.org and get connected with the people that can help you make better art. Hey writers, if you are anything like me, I know that one of the most frustrating parts about writing and publishing is maintaining all of your marketing. You know, that's where Third Scribe comes in, because at Third Scribe, they believe that authors shouldn't have to be webmasters. Not only webmasters, you shouldn't have to be a marketing guru, a graphic designer, or anything else except a writer. So that's why Rob McClellan and the good guys over at Third Scribe built this awesome platform. And it's a platform that pretty much handles everything for you. So here's how it works. Third Scribe is the premier social marketing tool for successful authors and cutting-edge publishers. As an author, your job is to create worlds, not get bogged down playing webmaster. And Third Scribe ensures every post happens in the most appealing way possible to attract readers, fans, and everyone else that's curious for maximum effect. If you want to create something but don't know how, then you should let Third Scribe's concierge support service meet your needs. Not everyone is born a techie, and we understand that. In fact, Third Scribe wants to be your personal IT staff, so you can spend your time writing, not dinking with your website. Third Scribe will support you so that you can do what you do best, and what you do best is write books and share them with the world. So Third Scribe will handle all that for you in an easy, tailored, and effective manner to ensure maximum sales. So go to thirdscribe.com today, sign up, and let them handle all of your website needs for you, where you can concentrate on being a writer. Thirdscribe.com. Go visit them today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind stories and the storytellers. Today I have many stories and many storytellers to share with you. We are going to highlight today Clones, the Anthology. This podcast, if you're listening to it on release day, is May 24th, and that is the day that Clones, the Anthology, is available for your Kindle. It's actually been available in paperback for maybe a week or two now that savvy buyers have found that out. But it goes wide to the world today, or yesterday, or whenever you're listening to this. But to begin with, I've got a couple of waves of authors that are joining us. And in the beginning here, I've got Daniel Smith and Michael Hicks on the call with me. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you. Well, hi there, Hank. Thanks.
Yeah. So both of you have been on the show before, and to begin, since we kind of know each other, Daniel, why don't you introduce the project to us? What's going on with this anthology? Where did the idea come from, and how did you wrangle these authors? And I know that's like 6 questions, but just kind of give us an introduction to Clones, the Anthology.
So Clones, the Anthology is a themed anthology. Themed anthologies are the idea of a themed anthology is you have a group of stories that settle on one idea type. And this is something that has become very common on the Amazon store and in paperback because people are realizing, curators are realizing that readers like to read more and more of what they like. If somebody likes zombies, they will keep going with zombies because they can't get enough zombies. If somebody likes vampires, they will read everything they can on vampires and aliens and whatever it happens to be. In this particular anthology, we went with the idea of clones. Now, for me, the idea of tackling clones goes back to when I was in school, a couple decades ago. And in school, I'm talking about grad school, and I worked at the Ethics Center at Western Michigan University. And at that time, biomedical ethics, a big hot topic was clones. And what did it mean to clone? What would it mean to our food industry if we started cloning the food that we eat? What would it mean to our bodies if we started cloning the organs? What would it mean if we started cloning people? What would it mean if we cloned workers? What would it mean if we were to clone a person and then something were to happen funding for that corporation, and who would be responsible for that person? And this level of discussion is the type of thing that universities talk about when they talk about ethics. They're not really talking about good or bad. They're talking about what I kind of like to call CYA ethics. Like, who's responsible for these things, when something does happen. And, right around that time, Dolly the sheep had just been cloned. And so this was a very, very real topic. And then today, a couple decades later, it's far more real. A lot of the meat that we get in the grocery store actually is cloned, and we don't realize that it's cloned. The Kentucky Derby race horses, we know, of course, that, if you win the Kentucky Derby, you're all set to have a life of breeding. But they also clone those horses. This is part of our society. They're in reproduction. Now, in vitro used to be something of science fiction, and then it became part of the mainstay. Living in New York, and I think in a lot of urban areas, there are several sets of twins in the classrooms of my child's school. They're all in vitro, and in vitro in and of itself is in some forms very related to cloning. And
well, yeah, I remember when it was called test tube babies. I remember vividly seeing these news stories on like Walter Cronkite or something when I was a little kid, and and they said it like it was some crazy science fiction that had all these moral implications, and like you said, I know many friends who have used that to successfully have children. It's crazy.
Well, exactly. Today, it's no longer, not only is it no longer science fiction, and it's no longer a pariah. It's actually a means for couples to manage how they want to grow their family, particularly couples that have focused on their career earlier in their life, and perhaps they may have issues with childbearing. In vitro fertilization is an excellent way to have children. And then with that, we also get into CRISPRs, where not only can you get in vitro, but now you can, and well, again, this isn't science fiction. This is happening today. You can say, hey, I put some eggs aside and I want to have them in vitro, but can you go through and make sure that none of them have issues with this particular type of problem with this gene? Or I just want to make sure that I grab the ones that are redheads, or I just want the ones that are going to be, however it is that they decide, athletically inclined to be good swimmers, or to some thing. And this isn't far out. This isn't the future. This is today. This is happening right now, and you can sign up with these doctors in Manhattan, in Miami, in Atlanta, in Los Angeles, anywhere around the world. So with that in mind, this has always been resident in my brain as philosophical phenomena of how things are happening to our society in a very literal sense. On top of that, there is the metaphorical sense of our society and clones and the same way that zombies are a metaphor to our society. And I found that fascinating. So then that took me to, I have this idea to create a themed, anthology. I have this idea for the clone theme, but I wanted to create something next level, something that wasn't necessarily literary fiction, but wasn't just Attack of the Clones. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love me some Star Wars, but something that's a bit better. So I had a chance to live in the dream. I have to say, if being an indie writer isn't a fantastic vocation in and of itself, I essentially asked a group of writers that I'm a fan of, and kind of fanboyed a little bit and said, hey, I really like what you do. I really think that you could, dip your foot in my pond. You play in this sandbox and take this theme and write a story to the next level. And Hank, you're one of those writers, and Mike Hicks is another one of those writers. And I'm so excited. I was talking with a reviewer friend today, and I don't want to out him, but something I was telling him, he said so many great things about your work, both of you and the other contributors to this anthology. And I said, well, you just can't believe how exciting it was for me to wait for each story to come in. I'm a fan of every one of these writers. And as these stories are coming in, I'm telling my wife, like, oh, you cannot believe. Oh, gosh. Oh, and wait till you read this. This is, and to work, side by side with everyone. This is, to be a writer, to be a working writer, and to be working with great writers, it was a excellent opportunity. So I don't know if I got all 6 of your questions there, Hank, but I think that sums it up.
That's good enough.
What was the question?
Yeah, who knows what the question was at this point, but it's a good answer. So no matter what the question was, and when you contacted me about this project, and before I'd even seen the roster of other authors, I was like, yes. And I absolutely want to be a part of this. And then I walked away going, I have no idea what I'm going to write about. But I love the idea, and it's one of those ideas that is kind of an earworm. You get in, and then you start kind of unraveling all of the possibilities, and it really I really commend you for the way you pitched it in a very with a very light touch. You pitched it to us writers as, a story about clones. It can really be any implementation of that, but next level. And man, that just, I don't know, that was such a fertile, pitch that, I really stewed on it for a while and think I came up with something unique, but with my own kind of sensibility about it. So, Michael, where did the idea for your story come from? And your story is called
Black Site. Well, Dan contacted me and asked if I wanted to make some money, and I said, yeah. And gave me a contract and told me I'd write about clones.
I should mention that a key thing to this anthology, as I said, I'm a fan of all the writers, but this wasn't an open call anthology. This was per invitation, and everybody, including Mike, were sought out, and this was over a year in the making to ensure that we got the list that we had. So that was not to interrupt you, Mike, but just to be clear, that's one of the reasons why we have the level of writers that we have. But this wasn't something that was thrown together in 30 days or 60 days. When you want quality, you have to be patient and you have to wait for it to ferment, if you will. But anyways, Mike, as you were.
All right. Well, now that Dan has stomped all over my joke, I guess I'll go with the serious answer. He did. He, like you, Hank, he invited me in for clones, and I said yes without any clue what I was going to write about. I just kind of jumped in blind with both feet because, Dan says he's a fan of mine. I'm actually a fan of his as well. I've loved what he's done with the few volumes that I've read of Tales of the Damned and Hugh Howey Lives. So I knew I was going to be in good hands with him as the curator. And I just kind of stewed over the idea about clones and some of their societal impact. I know back when they were test tube babies, there was a lot of concerns about religiosity and science kind of hitting each other head on. And I was looking at playing with the idea of doing something with a certain degree of religiosity, but rather than looking at religion being opposed to cloning, I wondered if there were any religions or cults that were actually for cloning. And I did a quick Google search and came up with the religion for the Relate. I'm going to probably mangle what they're called, Raelians. I think it was Raelins. And it just kind of let that sit for a while and thought about what they would do if they had the potential in future to start cloning. And from what I gathered, the little bit of research that I did on them was basically that they're for cloning. They want to try to answer the question of where life came from and get back to their creator, Elohim. So that all kind of fermented in my brain pan for a little while. And then I just got to writing. And as it grew, I thought I could have a fun little sci-fi horror story that kind of drew a little bit from Alien and Lovecraftian fiction, and just dived in with it and went crazy. And a crazy story was the result. So that became Black Site.
And you and I were talking before we started recording this call about one of your other stories and how that it just Revolver, how it kind of hit me between the eyes, and I mean this as a compliment. That what I was telling you that it was one of those that I had to kind of walk away from and stew on for a while, and then go back and read it again, and really consider all the implications. And Black Site did the same thing. It's like, man, what a heavy story! What a what genius storytelling. But one thing that I noticed about a lot of these stories, Daniel, or probably all of them, is that there's so many levels of implication and fallout from these stories that there's not a simple surface story in the whole bunch. Were you surprised at the level of stories that came in?
Well, was I surprised? I don't think that I was surprised because, I mean, that again, these were handpicked authors, and Revolver's a great example. One of my favorite stories. Another story from Mike Hicks that's deserving of an award. I mean, just easily one of the best short stories of last year. And so I really was expecting a lot from the authors. And then also, because again, the clones is both a literal effect on our society and a metaphor for our society. I was curious to see how, it was almost a challenge with that next level is you need to bring, some kind of variation to this. So I wasn't surprised. It was just saying, well, what are they going to do with it? I think what it really was is, opening each package was just kind of a bit of a wonderment to see how they had taken those ingredients and manipulated them in some different way. And Hank, you're going to be talking to each of the authors. I think most of the authors today, but your story is a great example of that. You did some amazing things with Eve's Children. The story starts off very sweet. It's a family story. It's a story of innocence. And I don't know spoilers, but by the time we get to the end of that story, it takes us somewhere where we have no idea where we're going to end up. And how did you come up with that story, Hank?
Wow. Like most of the things I write, I had an idea about a couple of people to begin with, and so I had this couple that the story opens with, and I just kind of had a sense of them, and I knew that this was going to affect them in some dramatic way, and the female protagonist is worrying over an announcement, a press conference that she is in charge of, and that was going to. She was really worrying over this because she is a person of faith, and her husband more so than she is. She kind of struggles with kind of this thought of, is there more to us than we can see on the surface, kind of thing. And she has made a discovery that is going to affect everyone on the planet, and she's really wrestling with, is she doing the right thing by exposing this? And so I had that initial idea, but I didn't really understand what the implications and what the fallout was until I started writing the story, and then that hook at the end came to me, and then it just flowed out.
Don't spoil it.
Yeah, no. But so yeah, that it was just it kind of was natural. I probably thought about it for 2 weeks before I really had this couple that the story revolves around. And then once I had them, I just kind of watched them and to see what they would do. And I know that's a very kind of hand-wavium kind of approach to craft, but that's the way it happens for me a lot. So.
Both of you is very interesting to me. So we're talking about the levels, and again, I wasn't surprised. It was more of I found the word I want. It was more of a curiosity to see, okay, how'd you come up to the challenge? But both of you, as well as Sue Quinn, played with the religiosity, and I found that fascinating of how each of you dealt with, and again, it wasn't a task of like, you three get religiosity. You know what I mean? It's like, that was something that you decided to fold into your story. And then neither of the three of you, I should mention for those listening, it isn't, it's an aspect of your stories. It isn't the primary theme of your stories. It's a theme of your story. And in fact, when I was, putting the stories into an order, I did think for a moment whether or not your stories are together in the book, and that is one of the things that ties them together in the anthology is it's a transition of religiosity through your three stories and different aspects of it. And I almost created segments based on these different themes because the other clone stories have doubles. There's some stories with doubles, and then there's stories where we're dealing with family replacements, both the replacement husband and in my story, like no other, a family member has been replaced. So it's odd, and once again, none of us, as far as I know, nobody colluded. It wasn't like it was like, let's write this or let's do that. So these were, but it's interesting that we did end up with some commonalities, yet dealt with them in extremely different ways. I mean, I certainly would not say Eve's Children and Black Site are two sides of the same coin.
Right. That's the religion or spirituality or however you want to term that is a theme that I play with a lot, probably because I live kind of in the buckle of the Bible Belt, and the way I was raised was kind of this it surrounded by fundamentalism and a lot of this thing, and kind of becoming an independent bystander who kind of steps back and looks at this and kind of the fallout from those things fascinate me. I don't know that I would fit neatly in anybody's, camp. But I love to explore kind of what that means to people and then what happens when some of those things are unraveled. That's just something that fascinates me personally. Well,
how do I phrase this? it wasn't preachy. I didn't want to use that word, but I can't think of a better one. But the religiosity in none of those stories was preachy. And of course I'm thinking of Awakening, Sue Quinn's story as well.
Yes.
Here. And
which is mind blowing.
Oh, now I'm fortunate enough. I'm currently reading Singularity 3, which is only a few people have seen that. Her editor, myself, and a couple other critique partners. So this takes place in that world, the Singularity world, and it's a standalone story without that world. But then even knowing the other aspects of the Singularity world, I'm just getting chills. I just enjoyed it so much. But with the religiosity, you gotta love that word, aspects to hers, we start out in a cyber abbey, I guess, is how I kind of think of it. Some futuristic abbey. When I put together the anthology, and her story is a great way to think of this. Have either of you ever seen the movie, The Matrix Animatrix?
No, I don't think so.
No, I have not.
So the Animatrix is a group of animated shorts it's an anthology. It's a video anthology, and it's a group of video artists that are animators, that are famous animators. And if I was a really good animator artist, I would know the names of these people to share for our listeners. But I encourage them to look for the Matrix Animatrix. And in reading Awakening, it made me think of that video anthology. And that video anthology goes from one animator to the next. Each of their videos is short, but each clip or little movie, if you will, is done in that style of that animator. It's a recognizable style, so when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, that's very much how I would expect this to be. Than the asteroid in Black Site, and in a way different place, quote unquote place, than Eve's children.
Well, yeah, I think all that shows the elasticity of the idea. We're all very different authors tasked with a singular idea, and we all approach it very, very differently. So, readers, you're going to get all kinds of stories.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Daniel, tell me about your story. You actually wrote two stories. You wrote Confessional, which is this wonderful three-part story that kind of sets up the different parts of the anthology. So you wrote that, and you also wrote Like No Other. How did you come up with these two themes and especially Confessional? I want to hear your insight into that.
Confessional. So I used to play a game called GURPS. Are you familiar with GURPS?
Yes.
It's like Dungeons and Dragons. GURPS stands for Generic Universal Role Playing System. And so my gamer group that I used to belong to, when we were running short on time, there was a game that we could play that was just a really super quick game. And my friend Robin always played the computer. And in this game, you're in a future utopia. And the game was called Paranoia. This is the name of the game. It's Paranoia. And your role play, you didn't have to have a character sheet. All you had to do was live past the computer. Because the problem is in this utopia, the future, where the computer runs everything, well, the computer's schizophrenic. Totally psychotic, and has broken down, and so maintenance is not performing well. But the thing is, you can't really report a maintenance problem because you kind of come off, as a terrorist, or could be treason. And there's only one penalty for treason, and of course that's termination. And so that's kind of that. Each of the confessionals is I kind of remember how we used to play that game. It was just a matter of trying to outwit Robin, our computer, when it was our turn to go into the confessional in the game of Paranoia. And believe me, you never won. I mean, you can't beat the paranoid android. You fail. So that's how that story came about. Now, I had an idea initially before Clones the Anthology to write like 99 of these, like fizzle out confessionals and, just have them like strung together. And I have a bunch of them. And, when I put clones together, I had asked a friend of ours, if he, there was a friend of ours that was possibly going to include a story, but he was all busy with his sailboat. And then, and then I contacted him again later, and I'm like, well, can you at least write a forward? And he was busy. So I didn't have a forward. And, I thought, well, rather than write a forward, I'll just grab some of my favorites of these, paranoia stories and put them in there. And so those become the confessionals. Now, as it turns out, I think that from what I've heard from the, reviewers, the early reviewers, it worked well because it sets kind of a pace. We have one at the beginning, one in the middle, one at the end. And like this Animatrix, movie that I mentioned before, which now I hope you run off and watch after our discussion today.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
I think it may be on Netflix, or was for a while. It's kind of fun. I believe that these little 2-page confessionals, they do well with the pacing, and I think the reviewers say so as well. So.
Well, it was one of my favorite parts of the book, and I'm not just blowing sunshine. I thought it was unique. And I really loved it. I thought that it worked perfectly to set the tone, but also made me want to read the book from cover to cover instead of what I normally do with anthologies. And everybody out there listening, don't judge me for this. I normally, when I get an anthology, will start by looking to see which authors I know and read their stories first, and then after that look for ones with compelling titles, and then find new ones. But this made me want to read it as a book, which I thought was genius.
Oh, well, thanks.
So it made me want to. It made me feel like I was following a theme from beginning to end, and made me want to kind of read through it like that, which I think is great.
Well, again, flattery will get you everywhere.
Well, and that's what I'm hoping for.
So maybe, if we do ever do another clones, then maybe we'll have more confessionals, because they are fun to write, and I do have more of them. They're
I think it's fantastic. Listen, let's add in some other folks. So we just added a few more authors that are participating in this project. So I'd like to introduce Nathan Beecham, Jessica West, Joshua Engel, and Risa Walker to the conversation. Jessica is the editor of this fantastic collection. And Jessica, I want to get some thoughts from you in just a minute about kind of what your role was with this was. But Nathan, let's start with you. Tell us about your story and tell us where the idea came from.
You know what? I thought of the ending of the story first and sort of wrote it backwards. I like cognitive dissonance as a concept in story, and I like characters who are unreliable to some extent. I don't like too unreliable because then it feels like a cheat to the reader. But yeah, I thought of the end. I wanted a character right at the profound edge of recognizing their own cognitive dissonance and worked backward from there.
Excellent. And what's the name of your story?
The Replacement Husband?
Yes, The Replacement Husband has gotten lots of comments. Evidently, you have really struck a nerve with readers. Did you have any idea that it would resonate with people the way it has?
I never have any idea what short stories, when I write them, will be received well and which ones won't. It feels like a total crapshoot. There's stories that I love and think are excellent, and then get rejected 40 times, and then there's a story that I'll write that think is on the weaker side and it gets picked up quickly. So I never ever have a feel for that myself. The stories that I really like the best frequently are not the ones that editors do. In this case, I actually really did like this story, and I guess maybe that's why it's quite a surprise to me that other people seem to like it also.
Excellent. Joshua Engel, your story is called The Vandal.
Hello.
And tell us a little bit about where your story came from and what it's about.
Well, any story I write, I sort of start with a theme, and usually involving ethics or philosophy, something I want to talk about, and I just constantly write ideas. I have a big notes file of like 80 pages of just story ideas, and then once I decide on something I want to talk about, I go down and select which ideas would fit that theme. And so I had this written down already for this idea of a clone who sneaks in and vandalizes somebody's house, and it turns out this guy's long estranged clone, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to write it.
Awesome. So you had the idea for the story, something you've been kind of working on for a while, or had the idea for?
Yes.
Good. Do you have a do you keep up with story ideas? Like I have a little teaser file or tickler file that I'll, as I come up with some weird idea, I'll write it down, and then every now and then I'll go back and look at some of those ideas. Do you do that?
Exactly. Yes. Yes, I do.
That's great.
There's some authors like Stephen King, I think, says he doesn't write anything down, and he only uses the ideas that stick in his mind. I can't do that. I write down every little idea I have, and I go back to him for stuff like this.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm just going to go ahead and call out Stephen King publicly. I don't buy half of the stuff that he puts out as advice. I don't believe it. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Risa Walker, welcome to the show. You've been on the show before. You know I'm a huge fan. And your story, Splinter, is fantastic. And yours has a tie-in to your time travel series, does it?
Yes, it does. I had a lot of readers who had asked exactly what happened when Kiernan went back into the hotel in 1893, and it involved a lot of versions of Kiernan. So when the opportunity came along to write a clone story, I thought, well, there are time travel clones too, at least in my series. So I decided to jump on that and answer some of the questions that readers have had.
Excellent. Was this an idea that you had? You said that readers have asked, but is this something that you've been looking for a way to bring into the story, or was this something that was already kind of hatched?
Yes. Initially, when I wrote the novella Time's Echo, which is one of the 0.5 novellas in my series, it's from Kiernan's perspective, just as this story is. And I had thought about continuing it further and taking it all the way through the World's Fair, but that would have been a novel if I had done that. And I was contractually obligated with Skyscape to stick to novellas instead of additional novels. So I ended up cutting it off earlier and kind of pushed the idea aside for a while until this came along, and it seemed like a good opportunity to explore things a little bit further.
Yeah, and you are a great example, Risa, of an author who is really using all of the forms of publishing available to us now, and a really great example of the way indie publishing has freed up authors to explore different venues for getting their work out. And I'd like to talk about that more in a minute, but that's something that I'd like to explore. But Jessica, before we move on to that, Jessica, you are the editor of this project. You are also a writer, am I correct?
Yes. I do a little bit of writing, mostly editing, though, as it turns out.
Gotcha. What is it like being the editor on a project like this? Do you, how do you go about approaching these stories that are very disparate but all linked together? Do you have a certain process that you use when you're trying to help hone these stories?
I use a lot of summarization because actually, as I was working on Clones, I have 2 or 3 other anthologies that I was also working on at the same time. So I was working with approximately 50 some odd authors plus some novels and other things. So it was really hard to keep it straight. I depended a lot on my own ability to summarize these stories and keep everything straight. And it was chaos. It was mass chaos, but somehow it just all fell into place. I think Daniel made it a lot easier on me than it probably would have been otherwise, because he sent me each story as it came in and as it was beta read and kind of gone through with before coming to the editing phase, which helps out a great deal. So he didn't overload me with all of the stories at once, but once I'd become familiar with each author and each story, and we got each story where it needed to be, we were able to look at the collection as a whole. And as Daniel said, we put a lot of effort and thought into the order of the stories, and that was a lot easier to do having the summaries there. Even with everything else going on, it was a lot easier to focus when you have those summaries to just at a glance look at.
Okay. Do you approach editing of short stories differently than you would edit a novel? Is the process any different, or is it just a shortened version of the same process?
It depends really on the story. It depends on the work that's needed. A lot of authors just need a good line edit and a good proofread. So that changes the process drastically. And a novel, the difference between a novel and a short story, it's hard to explain. You look for the rhythm of it and what the author is trying to accomplish. That's always my primary focus, is what are they trying to convey and how can I help them best do that? How can I make sure they do that without having too much other stuff involved? And that is the biggest difference, in my opinion, between a novel and a short story, is the context. You have the heart of a story. Every story has a heart, and without it, it doesn't live. It dies. It goes nowhere. It doesn't resonate. But the context, you need that context for the rest of the story to live. You can't just have the heart of the story. You can write a single line, and maybe it'll resonate, maybe it won't. But there's still context, whether it's implied or written and shown, demonstrated. And that's the biggest difference between a novel and a short story, is the amount of context you have. But with a short story, the author really has to be able to hit really hard with a small fist. And I try to help them do that. That's how I approach it. I look for concise writing and how can we tighten this up? How can I tweak this verb to make this whole sentence just really punch? So I think if there's anything, the differences in editing a longer work versus a shorter work is that you want that hard, small, solid punch as often as you can get it at every opportunity. And with a novel or a series of work, anything, you have a bit more room to explore, and you can be a little bit more laid back, and an author can really get to enjoy the tone of that piece more.
As someone who you have edited on a couple of occasions now, I can really say, if we have any authors out there that are listening, the importance of a good editor is crucial. That I've worked with different editors and also some editors that are really just proofreaders, and the skill of an editor to help you sound more like you is phenomenal. And that's one thing that I really want to give you kudos for, is that you would send me notes that enhanced my story while staying true to my story and still sounding like me. And that's a skill. I don't know that that's a skill you can learn. That just may be a God-given gift that good editors have. But it was a phenomenal experience.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I want to talk craft just for a moment. Authors, I'm going to start with you, Daniel. How do you and you have contributed to other anthologies as well as curating this one, but how do you approach writing for an anthology differently than you do writing either a short story or a novel for yourself. There's a whole different process that happens when someone says, I want a story that centers around X or that's on this theme or whatever, as opposed to one of the stories that's just always rambling around in my head. How do you approach those differently, Daniel?
Actually, I don't. I stick to a theme that's assigned and just write it as I would any other story. The only time I've ever catered a story, if you will, to event is when I wrote Hugh Howey Lives. And the reason being is that story was prompted by Hugh, and then I'd asked to use his name for it. So I certainly did. I was very purposely went through and edited and made sure that my writing was in a vein that I thought would align to something his readers would be receptive to. And I thought that was a wise thing to do, considering he was kind enough to let me use his name on the cover. As far as anthologies, it's like any other story prompt. If somebody says, I think you had said it in another interview, if somebody says "End of the world and pandas" or something of the sort, then you just kind of go to it, and the reason why you've been invited into that project is because the curator wants your voice. They want your painting on the wall in their gallery, and to do anything different than that is to shortchange the curator and to shortchange the readers. I'm excited to have readers come and see, or come and read Risa Walker alongside Nathan Beecham and Josh Engel. There's 3 different styles of writing and 3 different stories, but they're all magnificent and they all bring something that I truly enjoyed. I shared with you, Hank, earlier in the podcast and before some others joined, I'm a true fan of every one of the authors. And I think that for the anthologies that I've been invited on, that people are fans of my work. And I guess if there's any influence in my writing, I try to do my best to respect that.
I fully agree with you. Nathan, how about you? Do you approach writing for a specific project differently than you do for your own work?
Not necessarily. I think the only consideration that really went into this particular story was, if I'm really honest, I didn't want it to fall flat. I'm pretty impressed with the lineup of writers included in this anthology, and I didn't want my story to be the obviously or the inferior story among them. So I spent probably more time worrying about this story and fine tuning it than I would other stories, which is maybe part of the reason it turned out well. But no, I didn't, from a craft standpoint, do anything differently than I would have for any other story.
Gotcha. Okay. Michael Hicks has rejoined us. Do you approach writing for an anthology differently than your own work?
Yes and no. As with anything that I write, I definitely want to put my best foot forward. Any one of the anthologies that I've been in, I think this is now my 4th. Any one of the stories that I've written could be a reader's first experience with me, so I definitely want to hopefully impress them right out of the gate. In terms of approaching the story craft-wise, with anthologies, it's a little bit differently. On my own, I probably would not have written a clone story, but Dan invited me, and I said yes, so I locked myself into definitely writing a clone story, and hopefully one that I was able to put my own twist on and bring my own kind of game to the table with it, and hopefully readers like it.
Yeah. Risa, what about you? Do you approach the process differently?
To some extent, yes, because generally I'm writing longer works, but this is, like Michael, this is my fourth time in an anthology. And each time I've looked at it as an opportunity to explore something from a slightly different perspective than I was able to in a novella form or in novels. And there are a lot of stories within the Chronos universe that I would like to explore that I haven't really been able to. So for me, it has been a chance to look at my ongoing series in slightly different ways. And it introduces me to, and my series to new readers, but it also gives my readers, slightly different perspectives on characters or events that they may have thought they understood, or that they may have, in the case of this story in particular, in the case of Splinter, have wondered exactly what happened, and I had not been able to go into enough detail within the books because I was limited to 3. So,
I love it. Joshua, what about you?
I don't really approach, or at least I didn't approach this one differently. Like I said, I already had the story idea, so Daniel approached me with it. Can you write a story about clones? And yeah, sure, I already have this story about clones, I might as well just write it. This is actually even the second story about clones I've written. It's a really provocative theme, I think. No, I didn't really approach it differently. Ditto Nathan, though, that I just wanted it to be really good in being invited to a project like this, because I'm kind of the newbie in the group. I actually published my first book literally 4 days ago, so that's how I approached it.
What is that first book?
Thorn. It is called Thorn. It is about the most evil demon of all time who realizes that he has a conscience and he wants to become good.
That sounds right up my alley.
Yes, I was just kind of speechless for a second because I was just kind of rolling it over in my head. Oh my God, that's amazing! I am gonna go pick that
Time
up
to go
right
on
now.
Amazon.
I have to check that out.
I just started reading it, and it's very entertaining, Joshua.
Oh, awesome! Thank you. I'm glad you like it.
So I've read every one of these authors, and the way that I stumbled across Joshua is I was given a copy of not Thorn, but some of his other early works when I was talking about putting together this anthology. Like, you have to read this guy. This is a really good guy, and that was how he earned his invitation into the anthology. I became an instant fan, and and Thorn. I encourage all the listeners to go out and buy a copy.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
apparently, Josh, it's not just your first book; it's your first 2 books.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's not a full book. It's more of a novella. So I just went ahead and published the second one right away to give people something else to read. So the first 2 novellas in the series are already out. It's going to be a series of 5 novellas.
Okay. I see the third one comes out in a couple weeks in June.
Yep.
That's
Very cool.
When you bring that up about publishing the 2 novellas, I had a conversation the other day with Lawrence Block, who will be on the show in a couple of weeks when his episode will air. And Lawrence has had an over 50-year career writing mysteries and crime thrillers. And we were talking about how the landscape of publishing has changed, and how self-publishing specifically has allowed for authors to publish works that are more than there's always been some anthology magazines and things like that where you could publish a short story, and then that market has kind of waxed and waned throughout the years. And then there's the novel market, and if anything fell between those two, it was considered not publishable. But that has completely changed now, and what we discovered is that people have appetites for all of those things. They've just never had a way to discover them and for people to publish them. Nathan, what has the self-publishing done for you?
In terms of creative freedom,
creative freedom for allowing you to get your books to market. Like, how do you feel like that the publishing landscape of today has opened doors for you and has allowed you to kind of put your art out that maybe in a way that you never would have been able to?
So I'm a little bit of a black sheep in that I attended a traditional MFA program and had fairly heated arguments with some of the faculty in that program about the merits of self-publishing, and decided to pursue self-publishing in spite of some of their strong advice that I not do so. And I chose self-publishing for many of the reasons that you just listed. One, being able to bring work to the market quickly. Two, being able to form a whole different sort of relationship with your readers and respond to their interests far more quickly and tactically than you can through a traditional publishing house. That said, I have a novel that I have an agent, presenting to traditional publishing houses right now. I'm not opposed to traditional publishing, but as an artist, I think, especially as a writer, you're selling yourself short not to be involved in self-publishing. And since graduating from the program, a little more than a year ago, a couple of the other people in my program are now self-publishing work, and it seems to have made an impact. In that the program itself is now a lot more embracive of it, because I think, the industry is changing and it's changing fast. And if you ignore self-publishing as a writer, you're going to be selling yourself short in huge ways.
Absolutely. What about you, Joshua? I know that you're new to publishing, but has this made it easier for you, the way things have changed the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm a follower of Hugh Howey, and I've definitely drunk his Kool-Aid about how amazing self-publishing is.
Haven't we all?
Yes, exactly. I actually come from the film world. I went to school for film.
Hugh Howey lives.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Excuse me. I didn't mean to step on you.
And in film, I guess we have YouTube, but nothing like this, like Amazon's self-publishing platform, has ever really happened in film. And it's really exciting for me to make this transition to a place where indie authors really can earn a living this way. It's realistic to hope for that, and where indie authors can have a voice.
What about you, Michael? How has indie publishing changed the way you do things? Or how has it allowed you to pursue things?
Well, it's allowed me to pursue it, period. It's definitely a lot easier to break into, I think. It's worked out very well for me. I've enjoyed being able to develop my own team with cover designers and editors, work with a few different people to get my books out to market. Traditional publishing I have tried my hand at and not gotten very far, and it's a very long road with a lot of denials along the way. But you keep trying and see what happens. For now, definitely self-publishing is my best way to market. But we'll see what happens. I don't want to put all of my eggs in one basket and just be strictly on Amazon. I would eventually like to be with a publisher. Eventually. Get into hybrid publishing, be able to self-publish and get a traditional market for a wider reach.
Yeah. And Risa is a perfect example of that. Risa, how has the way the landscape has changed affected your publishing and your writing?
Well, I'm an odd example of that, because in a very real sense, all of my eggs are in one basket because I am hybrid, but I am with Amazon Publishing. So my books occasionally find their way onto traditional bookstore shelves, but it's rare because their view is that I'm in league with Bezos and I don't deserve a spot with them. But, to be honest, I'm perfectly okay with that. I grew up in the middle of nowhere without access to a bookstore and would gladly have sold my soul for a Kindle. So the fact that my books are on there and they are readily available, also in print for those who want to order them that way. But I started out self-published and would almost certainly have remained self-published if it hadn't been for the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest. I didn't have any luck drawing an agent, and I still don't have an agent and don't really want one because every time I've dealt with one, they rubbed me the wrong way somehow, and I'm like, why do I want to give you 15% of what I earn? So
it doesn't look like you need one.
And I don't now because I have had a phenomenal experience with Skyscape, which is part of Amazon Publishing. They've been extraordinarily flexible in terms of letting me participate in indie anthologies like this one, and also in terms of allowing me to self-publish the novellas in my series. I didn't even think about going to another publisher when I started writing my next series, which will debut in October. They gave me an excellent offer, and I didn't see the need to shop it around. So I'm very happy with my situation in being hybrid, in that I can be indie and get that nice 70% royalty over on the self-pub side for the novellas, especially when they do promo for my series. Anytime they promo the books in the series, the novellas are in this nice cozy little hammock and they rise up too. And I think that's true to some extent for short stories in various collections, because there are a lot of readers out there that and I'm this way. When I get hooked on a series, I want to read everything that is in that series. And I haven't spun off the short story separately. So when they contact me and say, the short story, where is it? I can say, guess what? It's in this collection, and it's, only $4.99 or whatever. And so that gets a few new authors their way, and hopefully gets them hooked on other series as well.
And like you were talking about the agent and the big five, you're published with Amazon's in-house publisher, and you self-publish. And literally every time I go to Amazon to look for something, one of your books is being featured somewhere or in a recommendation. So it's obviously
they've been very, very good to me. Yes, and I've been extraordinarily lucky with them. I'm not going to say that every Skyscape author has had the same success. I've had several friends that have gone with Skyscape, and I've been like, yes, yay, I'm glad you're in the club. And then they have a bad experience, and I just want to crawl under a rock somewhere. I feel so bad. And it's not, I'm not saying it's the author's fault, Skyscape's fault. It's very much a situation where Amazon is a business, and they will throw promo your way. And if it sticks and your book sells well, then they'll throw more promo your way. If it doesn't stick, then in most cases, you're not going to get the promotion opportunities. So,
obviously everybody has different experiences. I think we all could probably point to an author with a traditional publisher. One has a phenomenal experience, one does not. Things are they just work differently but what's great is we have options now. And I think that's where I think that's what really is the game changers, that we actually have options now. Jessica, with the rise of indie publishing, there's also been this great opening for indie editors, because we all need someone who can take a critical look at our work and help us to craft it and make it better. How did you get into this?
I started writing really in 2013. I stopped working and I stayed home with my youngest daughter. She's 4 now. and I started writing. I moved through critique groups and started editing for friends just as an exchange of services, and just kept continuing. As I improved on my writing craft, I tried to improve on editing as well. And I just, as it turns out, I'm better at editing than I am at writing. So here I am.
How have you connected with writers? How does a writer go about finding an editor? And do you have do you depend on repeat business from writers? Like I know that when you find when a writer finds a good editor, I'm sure that people want to keep coming back to that. And do you form relationships with writers?
They do, right. I can't speak for every editor, but for me personally, I would much prefer meet an author, work with an author, and then keep working with that same author. And I do have some authors like that. That's why my schedule is so, I'm always booked so far in advance, because I keep at least 2 slots open every month for those authors who I know are going to be coming to me with some work. And they know that I have a slot open for them. And they know that if they say, hey, look, can you start on this project this week and have it back to me in a few weeks? Say yes, because I'll hold a spot for them. So yeah, and if somebody wants to find, as far as advising an author on finding a good editor, I think the first thing, especially the way things are now in the indie publishing industry, you really need to have a good network. Because the best way to find a great editor is to have someone recommend one for you. Ask all of your writer friends, editors, give me some names. Who do you recommend? What do you like about them? And you're going to find several different editors. And a lot of times you can talk to these people, and if you're able to communicate effectively on the process, you know, you're asking them questions and they're answering you to your satisfaction, then you've probably found an editor you can work with. If it's the ideal editor, when you get that, and I've seen it, and it's a great feeling, but when you get that sample edit back, and everything in your whole body just screams, yes, this is the one. It's magic. It's magic. I've experienced that on both sides of the desk, you know, as the author and as the editor. When you really click with another person in that type of relationship, it's just clear that you found the right one. So, you know, it's a lot like love at first sight, except it's, you know, it's editing, so it's all platonic. Although I do keep my whip and my black leather handy just in case, but.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah. I mean, if somebody's looking for an editor, that's the one thing I would say you really need to do is get yourself a good network of friends.
Right. And what's the difference in what an editor brings and what a proofreader brings?
Well, you were talking about earlier, I think it was you who mentioned the empathy thing.
Yeah.
You know, I'll read a story and I'll say, you know, I'll just throw out a comment there. It's like, you know what, as I read your words, I get to know you in a way that people don't normally get to know one another. And editing, that's the thing, that one of the things that I love about it is that you can get to know a person on a whole other level. But when you do that, you get really familiar with not just their voice, but the voice of the piece, of the narrator and the different characters. And you can make recommendations like, you know, he sounds like the kind of person who would say this, you know, just whatever. And you can throw that out there, and that's a little bit more than what proofreading is. And it's not to say that a proofreader won't do that, but I know when I'm proofreading, I'm focused. I tell myself, okay, if there's a big glaring issue, I'm going to point that out. But this person, 9 times out of 10, when you're at the proofreading stage, the author is done editing and they're ready to move on from proofing directly into formatting. So I'm focused on a very different set of tasks. So it's a huge difference.
Right. And I can personally attest to the difference in that experience. And like we said earlier, as a writer, if you can find an editor that you really connect with and that understands your purpose, it will be a life-changing experience. So we have just been joined by the Anthology Godfather himself, Samuel Peralta. Well, welcome to the call, Samuel.
Thanks, Hank. I'm not sure how I can live to that intro.
Well,
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, you were one of my very first guests on Author Stories about 100 episodes ago, and I've been a huge fan of your writing since I first discovered you, since Jason Gurley introduced us a long time ago, and of course followed the meteoric rise of your anthologies that you've put out. And I messaged you a while back, and I said, Samuel, I want to read more of your writing. I appreciate what you're doing with the anthologies, but I'm a fan of your work. And I was so happy when Daniel invited me to this anthology, and I saw that you were contributing a brand new story. Tell us about Fahrenheit 1451.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Daniel for the invitation. It was really a great honor, as well as an opportunity to be able to do something with my own writing. So thank you very much for that. It's a pleasure to be among a lot of other writers that I admire and respect. And when I read the anthology, I thought to myself, "Gosh, this is a lot of good work," and I'm glad that I tried to bring my A game to this, because it is an excellent anthology. Fahrenheit 1451, as you know, the title will riff off of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, about a fireman who's hired to burn books. But that's where the similarity stops, because this is also about a fireman. But he's placed into a situation that's very different than what you find in Ray Bradbury's books. In fact, Daniel, when he tasked me to write a story here, he told me that he knew that I loved Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is also a novel in a similar vein to the anthology, but which approaches the theme in a very, very different way. So that's how I tried to approach the clone theme as well, same as everybody else here, looking at it from a different perspective. So the story here is as much about the protagonist as it is about the people who may or may not be clones. And that ambiguity is, in fact, what is at the foundation of the story.
And your stories tend to live in that ambiguity. That's one of the things that I really love about your writing, is the way you're able to get down to these very, very human emotions, to really underscore the humanity in ways that are not necessarily so black and white. Did you have an idea for this story before Daniel tasked you with it, or did this come to you after Daniel invited you?
Well, I had 3 different stories that I was working on, and for the clones concept. And it was only after I'd basically thought hard about it for weeks that I came up with this concept. And this was the fourth concept. I had, in fact, announced a pending title for my story, which was Finding My Father, which was a totally different story. And as you can tell, if you've read Fahrenheit 1451, it's what came out and what was eventually published was totally different from the original.
Excellent. Samuel, I asked the other writers just a moment ago to talk about how indie publishing has changed how they pursue their work, their craft. Would you like to comment on that?
I'm coming from a lot of from the publishing side as well as the writing side, and I would say that really what indie publishing has done is it's opened up avenues for a lot of writers who may not have had the same kind of opportunity to reach the kind of audience that they are doing now. Previously, they'd have to have run the gamuts of gatekeepers in producing their work and getting it to reach an audience. And what I've seen as a publisher is that this is only limited by the publisher's time. In other words, if I'm not limited by the quality of work that's out there. You'll hear publishers in the traditional sense saying that there is a lot of bad work out there and they have to act as gatekeepers in order to make sure that the best work only gets through. I have to say I started out looking at that, but when I started receiving stories from people, I found that the amount of brilliant work out there is enormous. Yes, I've had to reject a few stories, and yes, there's some people who said, well, I don't think I'm good enough yet to submit a story to the Chronicles, and yes, I've made mistakes along the way, but really I'm not limited by the amount of good stories there are. I'm only limited by the time I have to publish. If only I had an infinite amount of time, there are a huge number of stories that I would like to see out there. So as indie publishing evolves, I expect that we are going to see a march towards quality work. We're going to see the good indie writers come through and predominate because theirs are the work that is going to survive as the revolution continues.
And there's this really interesting thing that happens that I've noticed that the traditional model would say would tell an author, go get good enough and then come to us, and the indie model I've observed is kind of backward of that you've got that maybe someone like you, Samuel, or someone like you, Daniel, who's putting together some of these collections, that says, I recognize talent in you. Let's work with you to make what you're doing even better. And then what we're seeing is this whole stable of writers that are elevating their work through the working with others, and there's this really cool dynamic in indie publishing where authors are encouraging one another and helping to raise the quality of kind of the blanket of work. So that's an amazing thing, and I think that's something that you're doing, Samuel, that maybe people aren't really giving you credit for.
Yeah, it is amazing to see the amount of support and encouragement that the authors give to each other. It's like you're workshopping your stories or your books in public, and you've got other authors who are helping you along in your development. It's natural when you first go out to start putting your work out in the public eye that you'll find that there are other authors at different stages of development. A lot of them are going to be at much later stages than you are. A lot of them are going to be better than you are. And what happens is that you'll find that the indie world is very charitable. They're very much willing to help newcomers along, and that's what I found when I got into this world, that people were willing to share all of their tips with not just writing, but also publicizing, marketing, publishing. And now what we're finding is that authors who have gone through this and who have developed to a better stage, so to speak, are turning around and passing on what they've learned. It's what I've always said. Let your light shine and then pay it forward. You're seeing a lot of indie authors paying it forward now, and that just is a domino effect that encourages the whole movement and brings all boats up.
Absolutely. Daniel, what do you see? Samuel has curated a whole number of chronicles, and you are doing the Canyons of the Dam series, and now the Clones anthology. There is there's been this resurgence of the anthology and the collection over the last couple of years. That it's kind of indie publishing is really bringing that form back to the mainstream. How do you see this vehicle as changing publishing?
Well, first I want to say that I could sit on the floor and listen to Sam talk all day. Gosh, I just love to hear Sam talk. I love his story. I love working with Sam, and at the end of Clones, we send everybody over to read some Future Chronicles. I probably wouldn't have had the courage to curate Clones if it wouldn't have been for Sam's support, as well as the support of some other of the authors who have participated with this anthology. But Sam, thank you so much for doing Future Chronicles and for giving me the courage to put this together. You've done a great job for all of us, and I'm going to take that right into what your question there, Hank. Again, with Sam's support and with what people have done in the past, indie publishing or self-publishing, it really is more indie publishing because it isn't just the South. I think of myself as a small publisher. And that's because I'm able to do anthology. It's because I'm able to do a magazine, if you will, such as Canyons of the Damned, which I truly enjoy. If Clones is on the main stage today, then Canyons is on the side stage. In fact, we had one just come out at the time this podcast will air. I think number 5 came out last week. And Holt Smith, which is my little imprint, it's a little company. Years ago I used to own a coffee shop, and it wasn't Starbucks. We still served coffee, and we still had a poetry reading a couple nights a week, and we still had people come with acoustic guitars, and it was still a business. It was just as valid a business as the Starbucks down the street. And in that way, my little imprint is just as much a valid imprint as the big house down the block. So much the people that work down at Times Square, a few blocks from my apartment, they live in apartments, literally down the block from me. And I'm down in my lake house right now, and they go to their lake house. And, they sell books the way I sell books. And there really isn't a whole lot different other than these labels of corporate publishing or trade publishing or industry publishing. We're all producing content, and we're all trying to get stuff out there for readers to read. And I think the biggest difference is the barriers have been lifted, because without all of the corporate limitations that are in the way, and we're not talking about people, we're not talking about so-and-so didn't like my work, or this person rejected me, or this person's holding me back, but just the corporations involved of a big business. When you take away all those barriers, you just have so much more freedom. And it makes Canyons possible. It makes Clones possible. It makes what Sam does possible, because there's a flexibility. If everybody wants to carry their weight, if we all want to chip in together, we can get this to the readers, and we can get it to them in a timely manner.
That's awesome. This show has gone very long, and we're going to start steering this ship to dock in a moment. But I want to ask each one of you authors a question that I find fascinating, and I think our listeners will too. Nathan Beecham, you're going to be first. What is the strangest place that a story idea has come from?
Well, I grew up in a very old home, over 100 years old. And when I was about 11 or 12, my mom decided that she wanted new flooring, and being the sort of woman that she was, she took it, decided to do it herself and tore out the floor of this, old farmhouse. And underneath the floor, we found newspapers from, I think, like 1920s, late 1920s, early 1930s. And, that event is in my past. And one day I was jogging, and I thought, well, what if you opened up the floor of a house and found newspapers that were that old, but that told a different story than the world that we live in now? And so I ended up writing a story about World War II events that went quite differently in this world where these newspapers were printed, and a character sort of drawn into that world through their discovery.
I love it. Joshua, what's the strangest place or circumstance that a story idea has come from?
I've been thinking about my answer to this for the last minute since you asked Nathan. I have no idea. It's a very good question. I don't know, where do any stories come from deep in our subconsciouses, I guess. I don't know. I suppose I once had a dream and woke up and wrote it down, and I wrote an 8-page story based on it, and it was terrible, but that's I guess the strangest place a story has come from for me.
That's great. That's great. What about you, Risa? Where's the strangest place a story ideas come from?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. I tend to like to write into the wee hours of the morning. I am much more creative at 2 a.m. than I am at 2 p.m. And unfortunately, the school system hasn't gotten the memo on that. And I have to get up at the crack of dawn to get my kids to school. So I'm usually... I probably shouldn't be driving sometimes when I'm driving, to be brutally honest. And I was listening to songs that my kids had on the iPod, and one of my kids went through a Coldplay phase, and I like OK Go. And 2 songs came on back to back. One of them was OK Go's Lately It's So Quiet. And the other one was Coldplay's song, and I'm trying to remember the title, but the lyric is, those who are dead are not dead, they're just living in our head. And that was basically the genesis for the Delphi Effect, which will come out in October, the first in my new trilogy. So, maybe it's good to be sleep deprived sometimes.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Jessica, I know you have to bow out in a second. Where's the strangest place a story ideas come for you?
I think the strongest ones that hit me is really when I just, in the middle of the day, and it just comes out of nowhere. I just have these flashes of scenes, just horrific scenes that happen, and they haunt me for hours afterwards. So I just have to write it down and then just delete it or whatever, just get rid of it, because it's something that I don't even want to share with people because they're always so awful. But that's the strangest story ideas. That's the strangest place where I get the stories from, and it just, they never see the light of day. I just have to get them out of my head because they're horrific images that are just there. I don't know where they come from.
Well, we'll all keep an eye on Jessica. That's for sure.
Jessica is a story idea. That's the novel right there. There it is.
Right.
I think everybody who knows me pretty much knows this already. I'm the one you got to watch out for.
Right. Well, writers, if people knew what went on inside our heads, they would probably lock us up somewhere. But anyway, Michael, what about you?
Well, first I've had this on mute, so I've got my son here. If you hear any babbling that doesn't come from me, it'll be from him. Strangest place. One night we were watching Chopped, and they were going through the intro, and squid was one of the ingredients. And the way they framed that image was just so odd that the idea popped in there. It was like, well, what if they had to make Cthulhu? And that ended up being the short story Consumption. Another night we were driving up north in the dark, and there were all these deers lining the road, and I thought, well, what if they just started attacking everybody? And that became the basis of a novella that I'm shopping around right now called Mass Hysteria. So I think I'm just weird by nature. I don't know that I need weird experiences.
Yeah, I get it. I totally do. Samuel, what about you? Where's the strangest place that story inspiration has come from?
Thank you very much for making me number 5 or 6 because I've had time to think a little bit about this.
I was giving you some grace because you came in late.
But what I like to do is I like to watch the news sometimes, or I like to read stories. And you know that trope where you say, well, it's the same story as Romeo and Juliet, except in space. that sort of thing. I like to do that sort of thing. I like to do in space or with a telepath or something like that. So I was watching the news one night, and it was news about a very tragic accident, about a truck creating a multiple car accident. And it was the story about how this man was involved in the accident, and he found a little girl who was out of the wreckage of one of the cars. And I thought to myself, and it was a very emotional element, because he found the girl, and the girl was basically limp in his hands. And I thought, gosh, it is such an emotional moment when he finds the little girl. But what if he found a robot? And I thought, oh my God, I could write about this. And that was the genesis of humanity.
I love it. I love it. Daniel, what's the strangest situation that has brought about a story for you?
Well, you could define strange, but lucid dreaming. That we talked about the clone story earlier, Confessions. I said that had come from when I used to play GURPS, but what actually caused me the catalyst to actually write that down came probably close to a year ago, around 3 a.m., because I actually had a nightmare that the game that we had been playing, Paranoia, where the computer has you in the confessional and you can't get out no matter what you say. That was a real dream, and that it was really freaky, and it was that terror. You wake up staring at the ceiling, and you're not going to go back to sleep until you write that down. And that's when that was written. And apart from Jessica's edits, that's pretty much the draft that's in the book.
That's awesome. Thank you, authors, for joining me for this special roundtable for Clones, the Anthology. I appreciate each of you taking time out to come on the show. The book is Clones, the Anthology. It releases today, May 24th of 2016. And the authors featured in it are Daniel Arthur Smith, also the curator, Susan K. Quinn, Hank Garner, that's me, Michael Patrick Hicks, Samuel Peralta, P.K. Tyler, R.D. Brady, Risa Walker, and Joshua Engel. And we do hope that you'll go pick up a copy of Clones, the Anthology, and please leave a review on Amazon when you do. Authors, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hank.
So much, Hank.
Appreciate it.